Subscribe for more thrilling stories like this. Fire. The morning sun streamed through the heavy velvet curtains, spilling golden light across the lavish bedroom. Emma stirred, her head pounding and a vague memory of last night swirling like fog in her mind. Slowly, she opened her eyes, and froze. A gleaming ring rested delicately on her finger. She lifted her hand, her heart hammering in her chest. This wasn't just any ring, it was extravagant, far beyond anything she could ever imagine for herself. Panic and disbelief collided in her mind. What happened last night? Before she could piece together her fragmented memories, the bedroom door swung open. He entered, all presence and dominance, his tailored suit sharp, his dark eyes locking onto hers like a predator sizing up its prey. Vincent Moretti, the name that whispered danger in every corner of the city, was standing in her room. Her heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, exactly, but something more confusing, something she hadn't expected. "You're awake," he said, his voice low, smooth, commanding. He didn't move closer yet, he let the tension linger. "And I see you've found the ring." Emma's lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at him, her pulse racing, every instinct screaming at her that she should bolt, hide, do anything, yet her body stayed frozen. You put this on me," she managed to whisper finally, her fingers trembling as they traced the band, sparkling with a brilliance that made her feel unreal. Vincent smirked, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in a way that sent an unfamiliar thrill through her. "We agreed on it last night, Emma." Emma's mind reeled. We agreed. She searched her memory, trying to recall any conversation that could have led to this. Her thoughts were scattered. She remembered the party, the music, the way Vincent had appeared from nowhere, commanding attention without even trying. But a proposal, a ring, that was impossible, wasn't it? I don't remember," she whispered, panic lacing her voice. Her chest felt tight, her thoughts spinning in a dizzying storm. Vincent stepped closer then, and the room seemed to shrink around them. He didn't rush her, there was a deliberate calmness in his approach, a dangerous patience. "You remember pieces," he said, eyes glinting with amusement and something darker, something that made her pulse spike. "But that's the thing about promises, Emma. Sometimes you make them even when the moment feels blurry. And last night, you promised me." Emma shook her head, her mind refusing to accept it. I didn't." "You did," he interrupted gently, yet with the authority that brooked no argument. "You looked into my eyes and said yes. You agreed. And now, this ring is yours." The words echoed in her mind. Me, a ring like this, a promise like that. Her pulse raced, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and an inexplicable fluttering warmth in her chest. She had always known Vincent Moretti was dangerous. He was the kind of man who owned rooms without asking, who made enemies disappear, who had secrets no one dared to touch. Yet now he was here, in her bedroom, speaking as if they shared something intimate, something irrevocable. Emma tried to gather her thoughts, her instincts screaming caution. "Vincent, you're serious." Vincent's eyes softened slightly, just enough to disarm her. "I'm always serious about what matters," he said. His gaze dropped to her hand, lingering on the ring, then returned to her eyes. "And you matter, Emma." Her breath caught. She wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream, any reaction except the one taking over her body. Heat spread across her cheeks, and she found herself standing, taking a cautious step back, her hand still hovering near the ring. This is insane. I don't even remember. How? Why?" He tilted his head, studying her like a chess player considering the next move. "Insane, perhaps. Unexpected, certainly. But real. That, Emma, is very real." The tension was electric, suffocating yet thrilling. Emma's mind raced with 1,000 questions. How had this happened? What did it mean? Could she trust him, or herself? And yet, beneath the chaos, there was a small, stubborn part of her that felt intrigued. Alive. Dangerous, yes, but alive in a way she hadn't felt before. "Vincent," she began, her voice barely more than a whisper, "what happens now?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of his presence. His hand reached out, not to grab, but to gently touch hers, his fingers brushing against hers as if claiming both the ring and her attention. "Now, we start," he said simply. "We see this through. Together." Emma swallowed hard. The world outside could collapse, the city could burn, and yet all she could focus on was him, the ring, the promise. The air between them vibrated with tension and unspoken words, a dangerous allure that she couldn't, and didn't want to, resist. Her life, it seemed, had just changed forever. And somehow, deep down, she knew there was no turning back. The city outside her apartment felt different now, as if the world had subtly shifted overnight, the ordinary streets and familiar faces tinged with a sense of danger and secrecy she hadn't noticed before. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, the ring glinting on her finger as sunlight caught it, and tried to piece together how her life had spiraled so suddenly into something that felt more like a movie than reality. Vincent had left her bedroom only moments ago, but his presence lingered, like a shadow she couldn't escape, a force that made her pulse race even when he wasn't near. Her mind reeled with questions. What did the promise mean, truly? Was it a binding agreement, a superficial gesture, or something darker, something that entangled her in the world he inhabited? She had known rumors about Vincent Moretti, about his influence, his reach, the whispered stories of those who'd crossed him and disappeared without a trace, yet she had never imagined herself stepping so close to a man whose name alone carried fear and fascination in equal measure. As she rose and moved to the window, staring down at the bustling city streets below, Emma felt an unexpected mixture of exhilaration and apprehension. The coffee shop across the street was already filling with people, laughing, chatting, entirely unaware of the dangerous undercurrents that Vincent moved through like a shadow in daylight. And yet, here she was, tied, figuratively and literally, to him by a ring that sparkled with the weight of a promise she barely remembered making. Her phone buzzed suddenly, and she jumped, fumbling to pick it up, only to see a single message from an unknown number: "Breakfast is ready. Don't be late." Vincent. Her stomach tightened. She didn't know whether to feel fear or anticipation. Carefully, she dressed, choosing something neutral, professional, something that wouldn't draw attention, though she doubted anything she did could go unnoticed by Vincent's network. The ride to his private estate was swift, escorted by black SUVs that seemed excessive for a simple breakfast, and Emma felt the tension building in her chest with each passing block. The estate itself loomed as a fortress of wealth and power, manicured gardens surrounding an imposing mansion, guards stationed discreetly but visibly at every entrance. She stepped out of the car, the crisp morning air brushing her face, and immediately sensed that every detail was being observed, analyzed, catalogued. The front doors opened before she could knock, and Vincent was there, waiting, as if he had been anticipating her every step. He didn't smile, not fully, not yet, but his dark eyes held an intensity that made her stomach flutter and her mind race. "Good morning," he said simply, his voice as smooth and commanding as ever, and yet there was an undercurrent, a hint of amusement, like he knew exactly the storm of thoughts raging in her head. She nodded, swallowing hard, feeling both vulnerable and electrified under his gaze. The breakfast room was immaculate, a long table set with the finest china, fresh flowers, and a spread that seemed almost excessive for a simple morning meal, yet everything about Vincent screamed excess, power, and control. As they ate, he spoke in measured tones, not about the ring directly, but about plans, schedules, things she couldn't fully comprehend, business dealings, alliances, subtle threats embedded in casual conversation, all the while studying her reactions, gauging her understanding, her comfort, her fear. Emma found herself drawn into the conversation, her natural curiosity and sharp mind fighting against the undercurrent of intimidation. She realized that Vincent didn't just command with fear, he commanded with intellect, charm, and an almost magnetic presence that made it impossible to look away or question him without hesitation. When the breakfast concluded, he stood and gestured for her to follow. They walked through the sprawling halls, past priceless art and intricate furnishings, the echo of their footsteps filling the cavernous spaces, until they reached a private office, walls lined with books and confidential files, the air heavy with the scent of leather and old money. Vincent closed the door behind them, and Emma felt the sudden isolation like a weight pressing down on her. "Emma," he said, finally breaking the silence, "last night wasn't just about a promise or a ring. That was the beginning. You are now a part of something much bigger than yourself." Her heart pounded, confusion and apprehension mixing with a strange thrill. "Part of something bigger. I don't even know what this is," she whispered. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, the intensity in his eyes making her chest tighten. "You will, and soon. But first, you must understand the rules. There are those who will test your loyalty, your courage, your judgment. And I need to know that you can hold your own, even in the moments you feel most afraid. Emma nodded, though fear and excitement battled within her. She knew this wasn't a casual statement. Vincent didn't make idle remarks. Every word was deliberate, every glance calculated to elicit a response, to gauge her readiness. And somehow, despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, she wanted to prove herself, not just to him, but to herself. Over the next few hours, Vincent began to introduce her to the edges of his world, trusted lieutenants, guarded territories, the subtle network of influence and power he wielded with precision. Emma listened, absorbing every detail, aware that each piece of information was a thread in a web she was only beginning to comprehend. Yet she couldn't help but notice the moments when his gaze softened, brief flashes of vulnerability or amusement that hinted at a side of him few ever saw. By the time the day waned, and the sun dipped below the skyline, Emma felt an overwhelming mix of exhaustion, exhilaration, and an unshakable pull toward the man who had rewritten the rules of her life overnight. As she prepared to leave the estate, Vincent's hand brushed hers, just enough to send an electric jolt through her, and he leaned closer, voice low and intimate. "Remember, Emma, the ring isn't just a promise to me. It's a promise to yourself. To step into this world with courage, with resolve, and to trust that some things are worth the risk." She swallowed, heart pounding, understanding for the first time that her life had irrevocably changed. The city outside no longer seemed mundane. Every shadow, every corner held a story, a threat, or an opportunity. And through it all, one truth remained undeniable. Vincent Moretti was now at the center of her world, and she had no idea what storms or passions awaited her, but she knew she could never turn back. The days that followed blurred into a dizzying whirlwind of emotions, experiences, and revelations that Emma could never have imagined mere weeks ago. Each morning, she awoke to find Vincent's presence lingering in ways that went beyond the physical. The ring on her finger was a constant reminder, a binding symbol of a life that had shifted overnight into danger, glamour, and intrigue. She tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, going about her routine, but the pull of Vincent's world was inescapable. Even small errands became exercises in vigilance, each glance over her shoulder reminding her that the man she was tied to didn't just command a room, but an entire city. Vincent, ever meticulous, made sure she was introduced to the subtle etiquette of his world, how to speak, how to read between the lines, and how to move with caution without revealing fear. Yet, despite the lessons in power and control, he also showed her glimpses of a side few ever saw. A fleeting smile when she asked a clever question, a softened tone when discussing matters that didn't concern business, and the rare, vulnerable look in his eyes that suggested a man who carried burdens no one else could understand. Emma felt herself pulled deeper into his orbit, fascinated and terrified by the contrast between the ruthless businessman and the man who, in quiet moments, could be almost human. One evening, Vincent summoned her to a private dinner at his penthouse, a space that overlooked the glittering cityscape, the skyline ablaze with lights that mirrored the intensity of the life she had been thrust into. The table was set with precision, candles flickering to cast a warm glow over crystal glasses and an array of food so exquisite it seemed almost unreal. Emma hesitated at the threshold, but Vincent's gaze held her, commanding yet patient, and she stepped inside, heart hammering against her ribcage. "Sit," he said simply, gesturing to the seat across from him. As she obeyed, she noticed the faint tension in the way his jaw tightened, a subtle reminder that, for all his power, he was a man who thrived on control and caution, even in moments of intimacy. Dinner was a silent dance of glances, measured words, and subtle testing. He watched her carefully, gauging her reactions to the delicate wine, the taste of unfamiliar dishes, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she reached for the silverware. Emma felt simultaneously scrutinized and cherished, caught in a web of emotions she hadn't anticipated, a dangerous combination of fear, attraction, and curiosity. After the meal, Vincent leaned back in his chair, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Emma," he began, voice low and deliberate, "the ring is more than a promise, it's a bond, a contract of sorts. Not legal, not enforced by law, but enforced by consequence. You are now tied to me, to my world, and to the decisions that come with it." Emma's breath caught. The weight of his words sank in, her mind racing with possibilities, dangers, and responsibilities she hadn't considered. I understand," she whispered, though uncertainty lingered like a shadow in her chest. "Do you?" Vincent's smile was faint but sharp, the kind that hinted at knowledge she didn't yet possess. "You will," he said, standing and moving closer. The space between them felt charged, a magnetic pull that made her heart pound, her thoughts scatter. He reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face, and the gesture, intimate yet commanding, made her pulse spike in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. Days turned into weeks, each filled with lessons in Vincent's world, meetings with allies and rivals, strategy sessions where she was sometimes observer, sometimes participant, always under the careful watch of the man she could neither resist nor fully understand. She learned to read the subtle signals of power, to recognize threats hidden beneath politeness, to navigate a world where a smile could conceal danger and a glance could seal a fate. And through it all, Vincent remained a constant presence, his expectations high, his attention unwavering, yet punctuated by moments of tenderness that were almost jarring in their rarity. Emma found herself questioning everything she had once believed about love, loyalty, and ambition. She felt the thrill of danger in her veins, the adrenaline of unpredictability, the intoxicating mix of fear and fascination that came from being so close to a man who could command a room, a city, or her very heart with equal ease. One night, after a particularly tense meeting with a rival faction, Vincent insisted she accompany him to a rooftop overlooking the city. The wind whipped around them, the night alive with sounds of distant traffic and the quiet hum of life below. He stood close, too close, and Emma felt the heat of his presence like a tangible force. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "The pull of everything you're now part of. The power, the danger, and the choice." She nodded, unable to speak, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear, desire, and wonder. He reached for her hand, fingers brushing the ring, and she felt a shiver run through her entire body. "This isn't just a game," he said, eyes intense. "You're part of my world now, Emma. And my world doesn't forgive weakness. But," his gaze softened ever so slightly, "it rewards courage, honesty, and loyalty. And I think you have all three, even if you don't fully realize it yet." Emma's chest tightened. The magnitude of his words, the weight of the life she had been pulled into, pressed on her in a way that made her feel simultaneously small and significant. She had entered Vincent Moretti's world unknowingly, but there was no going back. Her choices, her actions, her very presence now carried consequences she had never faced before. Yet despite the danger, despite the uncertainty, there was an undeniable thrill in being chosen, in being seen, in being trusted by a man who had never given such trust freely. That night, as she left the penthouse and returned to her apartment, the city lights stretching endlessly around her, Emma felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration, of vulnerability and empowerment. The ring on her finger caught the light, sparkling like a beacon of everything she had stepped into, a world of luxury, danger, passion, and power, all intertwined in ways she was only beginning to understand. She realized, with a jolt of clarity, that Vincent Moretti had not only claimed a promise from her but had changed the very fabric of her life. And deep down, in the quiet moments before sleep, she knew with an undeniable certainty that no matter the challenges, the threats, or the temptations that lay ahead, she could not, and would not, walk away from the man who had rewritten her story. The days that followed Part 3 blurred into a dizzying mixture of anticipation and danger, a rhythm that Emma found both exhausting and exhilarating. Vincent Moretti had a way of infiltrating every corner of her life, whether she wanted him there or not, and she was beginning to understand that the ring on her finger was more than a symbol, it was a tether, binding her to a world she couldn't escape. Even in her moments of solitude, she felt his presence, as if his influence reached beyond the physical, threading itself through her thoughts and decisions. One evening, Vincent summoned her unexpectedly, instructing her to meet him at a private lounge hidden in one of the city's most exclusive buildings. The elevator ride up was silent, each floor passing with a suspenseful pause, as if the building itself was aware of who she was and why she was there. When the doors opened, the lounge was dimly lit, shadows dancing across sleek surfaces and plush leather seating. A single bottle of champagne and 2 crystal flutes sat on a small table, waiting, as if the entire space had been prepared for this precise moment. Vincent stood near the bar, impeccably dressed as always, his dark eyes scanning the room before settling on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Emma," he said, voice low and deliberate, "tonight isn't just about us, it's about understanding the life you've stepped into. Power, influence, control, they're intoxicating, yes, but they're also dangerous. And I need to know that you can navigate both." She nodded, trying to steady her racing heart, aware that the faint tremor in her fingers betrayed the mix of fear and excitement she felt. He moved closer, close enough that the heat from his body brushed against hers, sending a shiver down her spine. Sit, he instructed, gesturing toward the leather chair across from him. She obeyed, captivated despite herself by the magnetic pull of his presence. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence heavy with unspoken words and electric tension. Then Vincent poured the champagne, his movements precise, almost ceremonial, and handed her a flute. To new beginnings, he said, his tone carrying both warmth and warning. Emma lifted her glass, her eyes meeting his, and for a brief moment, the world outside seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them and the charged air between them. Conversation followed, a careful dance of words and innuendo, strategy and subtle lessons. Vincent spoke of alliances, rivalries, and the delicate balance of power that defined his world. Emma listened intently, absorbing every detail, aware that each word carried weight, each gesture measured, each glance a test. And yet, amidst the gravity of the discussion, there were flashes of intimacy, moments where his gaze softened, or he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile that made her chest tighten in ways she couldn't explain. After the champagne was finished, he gestured for her to follow him to the balcony. The city sprawled endlessly below, a sea of lights and shadows, alive with movement and secrets. The night air was crisp, carrying with it the distant sounds of life below, yet the world felt suspended, as if it existed solely for them. Vincent leaned close, brushing his fingers against hers, the touch sending an electric jolt through her that made her knees weak. Emma, he said, voice low, the ring isn't just a symbol of a promise. It's a reminder that your choices now have consequences far beyond what you can see. You've stepped into a world where every decision matters, where every glance, every word, every hesitation can shift the balance of power. She swallowed hard, feeling both intimidated and exhilarated by the gravity of his words. I understand, she whispered, though uncertainty lingered in her chest. Do you, truly? He asked, his eyes piercing, as if searching for doubt she couldn't conceal. Emma nodded, though the truth was that she was still learning, still navigating, still discovering the extent of what she had agreed to, both knowingly and unknowingly, when she had accepted the ring. Vincent's hand lingered on hers, warm and firm, a physical reminder of the tether that bound them together. Good, he said finally, releasing her fingers but keeping his gaze fixed on her. Because the world outside this balcony is watching, always. And soon, you'll see just how deep this goes. Over the following days, Emma found herself thrust further into Vincent's realm. Meetings with influential figures, shadowed deals conducted in hushed tones, subtle power plays that could determine fortunes and lives, each encounter taught her more about the delicate dance of loyalty and ambition that defined Vincent's empire. She began to recognize patterns, to understand the unspoken rules, and even to anticipate moves that might seem invisible to anyone untrained in such subtlety. And through it all, Vincent remained a constant, a magnetic presence that dominated her attention, her thoughts, her emotions. His mentorship was as much a test of her intellect as it was of her courage, his occasional tenderness a reward she didn't expect but secretly craved. One afternoon, as they reviewed documents in his private office, he leaned back in his chair, watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. Emma, he said, voice low, deliberate, you're adapting faster than I expected. That's impressive. Most would falter under this kind of pressure, but you hold your own. She felt a flush of pride, tempered by nervousness, aware that praise from Vincent Moretti was rare and precious. Thank you, she murmured, unsure whether to feel relief or apprehension at the weight of his attention. He rose, moving behind her chair, and for a moment, she felt the heat of his presence, the subtle tension that had become a familiar undercurrent in their interactions. Impressive, he repeated, voice almost a whisper, and dangerous. Never forget that. Emma shivered, unsure whether it was the words, the proximity, or the electric charge that always seemed to follow him. Days turned into weeks, each filled with a mixture of business, subtle danger, and unspoken attraction that neither could ignore. Emma was learning to navigate the treacherous waters of Vincent's empire, while also grappling with her own feelings, fear, fascination, desire, and a growing respect for a man who seemed untouchable yet had allowed her to enter his world. One evening, as the city lights flickered below them from the penthouse balcony, Vincent reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, and Emma felt the weight of the ring once more, a constant reminder that there was no turning back. Emma, he said, voice soft but firm, you're no longer just an observer. You're a participant, and I trust that you'll rise to the challenges ahead. But know this, every choice you make now affects not just you, but me, my world, and everything we've begun to build together. She nodded, understanding in a way she hadn't before. The pull of his world, the danger, the thrill, and the undeniable attraction that simmered between them had become inescapable. Emma realized that she had stepped into something far greater than herself, a life filled with risk, power, and passion, and that Vincent Moretti was at the center of it all, a force she could neither resist nor walk away from, no matter how much she might try. The weeks that followed were a relentless storm of lessons, revelations, and emotions that Emma had never anticipated. Each day brought her closer into the inner workings of Vincent Moretti's empire, a world where power was currency, loyalty was tested daily, and danger lurked behind every handshake and smile. She found herself moving through the city with a heightened awareness, noticing subtle signals that once would have gone unnoticed, the wary glance of a driver who seemed too attentive, the coded language in a casual conversation, the shadowed figures lingering just beyond sight. Vincent had trained her well, not in combat or intimidation, but in observation, strategy, and the subtle art of influence. Emma had discovered a side of herself she hadn't known existed, a capacity for patience, insight, and courage that grew with each encounter. And yet, despite the lessons and the adrenaline of danger, it was the unpredictable moments with Vincent that left her both exhilarated and unnerved. One evening, he summoned her to a private dinner at his estate, the air heavy with the scent of night-blooming flowers and the quiet hum of the city beyond the gates. The table was set with meticulous precision, candles flickering to cast shadows that danced across the walls, and the soft clink of crystal glasses filled the room as he poured the wine himself. Emma could feel the intensity of his gaze as she seated herself, noting the deliberate way he measured every movement, every word, every glance. "Tonight," he said, voice low and deliberate, "is not about business. It's about understanding the stakes, the balance, and the choices that define us. And you, Emma, are no longer on the outside looking in, you are in the center, whether you like it or not." Her pulse quickened at his words, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a strange, magnetic thrill that she could neither explain nor resist. They ate in near silence, the weight of unspoken tension pressing on the air between them, punctuated only by the occasional sip of wine or the soft sound of a fork against fine china. After the meal, Vincent led her to the balcony, overlooking the city lights, the skyline stretching endlessly like a web of opportunity, power, and danger. The night air was crisp, carrying the distant murmur of life below, yet the space between them was charged, a palpable tension that seemed to hum with electricity. He moved close, close enough that the heat from his body brushed against hers, and Emma felt a shiver run through her, an undeniable acknowledgement of the attraction simmering between them. "Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "the ring isn't just a symbol. It's a tether, a reminder of what you agreed to, and what you now carry. Every decision, every move, every step, it has consequences." She swallowed hard, her chest tight, understanding more with each word that her life had irrevocably changed, and that there was no turning back. Days turned into nights filled with meetings, subtle threats, and moments of quiet intimacy, where Vincent would allow a rare softness to show in his eyes, a fleeting vulnerability that made her heart ache and her mind race. She began to see glimpses of the man behind the empire, the man who had mastered control and fear, yet could still care, still feel, and still trust her in ways few ever had. One night, as they reviewed documents in his office, Vincent stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his gaze dark and intense. "You're adapting," he said, voice low, deliberate, "faster than I anticipated. That's impressive. Most would falter under this pressure, but you," his fingers brushed against hers as he handed her a file, sending a jolt through her entire body. "You hold your own." Emma's heart raced, a flush spreading across her cheeks, but she knew this praise came with weight, the weight of expectation, responsibility, and an unspoken test of her courage and loyalty. The following day, Vincent called her to the headquarters of one of his ventures, a skyscraper that towered over the city, a fortress of glass and steel. The lobby was bustling, yet every glance, every step, seemed to signal to those around her that she was under Vincent's protection, or scrutiny. Meetings with executives, whispered negotiations, and subtle manipulations of power became her new normal, each scenario teaching her to anticipate, observe, and react with precision. And through it all, Vincent watched, often from a distance, sometimes leaning close to offer a subtle hint or correction, his presence a constant, magnetic force that Emma could neither ignore nor escape. Late one night, after a particularly tense meeting with a rival faction, Vincent led her to the rooftop. The city sprawled beneath them in a glittering panorama of lights and shadows. The wind tugged at her hair, the night alive with distant sounds, yet the space between them was charged, a moment suspended in time. "Emma," he said, voice low and deliberate, "you've learned quickly, but remember, the world we navigate doesn't forgive mistakes easily. Loyalty, courage, discretion, they're everything. And I need to know you understand that." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking deep into her chest. "I do," she whispered, though a mixture of nerves and exhilaration bubbled within her. He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers, the ring on her finger catching the city lights and sparkling like a beacon. "Good," he murmured, his eyes intense, "because everything we've begun, it depends on your choices now. On your strength, your wit, and your resolve." Emma felt a strange mixture of fear, excitement, and undeniable attraction coursing through her. The city below seemed alive with possibility and danger, each light a reminder of the world she had stepped into, a life she could no longer leave behind. Over the following days, Vincent's guidance continued, each lesson layered with subtle tension, attraction, and the constant reminder that the empire she was now part of required vigilance, intelligence, and courage. Emma discovered depths of herself she hadn't known existed, a resilience and determination that grew stronger with each challenge, each encounter, each moment where Vincent's gaze met hers, carrying both expectation and undeniable magnetism. By the time she returned to her apartment late one night, the city quiet and asleep, Emma's mind raced with everything she had learned, experienced, and felt. The ring on her finger was no longer just a symbol, it was a statement of intent, a declaration that she had entered a world far larger, far more dangerous, and far more intoxicating than she had ever imagined. And deep down, despite the uncertainty, the fear, and the uncharted territory ahead, she knew she would follow Vincent Moretti into whatever storm awaited, drawn by danger, power, and a passion she could no longer resist, bound irrevocably by a promise she had made, whether in clarity or in a blur of last night's events. Emma's life had become a delicate balancing act, a tightrope stretched across a world she had once only observed from the safety of the sidelines, but now inhabited fully, with every step carrying weight, consequence, and the ever-present shadow of Vincent Moretti. The ring on her finger seemed to pulse with its own energy, a constant reminder that her choices, her reactions, and even her thoughts were now inextricably tied to a man whose influence extended into every corner of the city, and whose reputation was whispered about in equal measures of fear and awe. Every day presented new challenges. High-stakes negotiations, subtle manipulations, and the careful navigation of a network of allies and rivals that Vincent had built over decades, each interaction a test of wit, poise, and courage. Emma had begun to recognize the hidden language of this world, the pauses, the glances, the unspoken cues that could signal loyalty or betrayal, opportunity or danger. Vincent, ever the patient and calculating mentor, allowed her to stumble at first, offering a guiding hand just enough to correct mistakes but never removing the thrill of discovery, the sense of urgency and consequence that sharpened her instincts and strengthened her resolve. One evening, he summoned her to a secluded mansion on the outskirts of the city, a place that exuded wealth and power, yet held an undercurrent of tension that made Emma's pulse quicken. The guards were discreet but vigilant, their presence a subtle reminder that the world Vincent controlled was one in which danger lurked at every edge. Inside, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Several of Vincent's most trusted associates awaited them, their expressions unreadable, their posture precise. Emma felt the weight of their scrutiny, knowing that every movement, every word, every glance would be measured and remembered. Vincent's eyes met hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the role she now played, and then he gestured for her to follow him to a private room where confidential matters would be discussed. The conversation that followed was intense, a dance of power, strategy, and negotiation, with Emma observing closely, absorbing details and learning to anticipate reactions. She found herself surprised by her own capacity for analysis, reasoning, and courage under pressure. Each decision she made was noted, every hesitation calculated, every success quietly acknowledged by Vincent in subtle nods or rare, approving glances. After the meeting concluded, Vincent led her to a terrace overlooking the city. The night was alive with lights and movement, the distant hum of traffic blending with the soft rustle of wind through trees. He stepped close, the heat of his presence radiating across the small space between them. Emma, he said, his voice low, deliberate, you are becoming more than I expected. You are learning, adapting, surviving in ways most would fail to comprehend. That is impressive. She felt a flush of pride tempered with nervousness. Praise from Vincent Moretti was not given lightly, and each word carried weight far beyond mere flattery. Thank you, she murmured, aware that the sincerity of her voice could be as revealing as her actions. He studied her for a moment, his eyes dark and penetrating, as if measuring not just her abilities, but her heart, her resolve, her very essence. But remember, he continued, his tone shifting, the intensity in his gaze sharpening, with every step forward, there is danger. You are no longer just a part of my life, you are part of my world. And in this world, mistakes are costly, loyalty is everything, and trust is a rare commodity. Emma nodded, absorbing the gravity of his words, feeling the tension coil within her, yet also the thrill of being tested, of being drawn into a life of power, passion, and peril that she could neither resist nor escape. The wind tugged at her hair as he reached for her hand, brushing his thumb against the ring that bound them. This isn't just about us, he whispered. It's about survival, strength, and the choices that define us. You've proven that you can navigate this world, Emma, but the next steps will demand more, from both of us. Over the following days, the intensity of her training and immersion increased. Emma was placed in situations that tested not just her intelligence, but her courage, her judgment, and her loyalty. She learned to read people like open books, to anticipate reactions, and to act decisively even when fear threatened to paralyze her. And through it all, Vincent was there, sometimes watching from a distance, sometimes stepping close with subtle guidance, his presence a constant force that was as exhilarating as it was intimidating. Their interactions became a careful balance of mentorship, attraction, and unspoken tension. Emma found herself drawn to Vincent in ways that terrified her. His dominance, his intelligence, his rare glimpses of vulnerability, all woven together in a man whose presence commanded every space he entered. One night, after a particularly grueling day filled with negotiations and strategic maneuvers, Vincent led her to his private study. The room was dimly lit, lined with books and artifacts that hinted at his history and influence. He gestured for her to sit, and for a moment, they simply regarded each other, the silence heavy with meaning. Emma, he said finally, voice low and deliberate, you've adapted well. You've demonstrated courage, insight, and loyalty. But there is a line you must never cross, the line between trust and temptation, between ambition and recklessness. Crossing that line could endanger everything, including us. She nodded, the weight of his words pressing into her chest, the thrill of danger mingling with an undeniable attraction she could not suppress. Vincent moved closer, the proximity making her pulse race, and for a moment, the world outside vanished. The ring, he continued, his thumb brushing against hers, is a reminder of what we agreed to, and a warning of what is at stake. Every choice you make now will have consequences, and I trust that you are ready for what lies ahead. Emma swallowed, aware that his trust was both a gift and a responsibility she could not take lightly. The following days were a whirlwind of activity, meetings, strategic encounters, and subtle tests of her judgment and composure. Each success bolstered her confidence, each challenge sharpened her instincts, and each interaction with Vincent deepened the complex mix of admiration, respect, desire, and fear that she felt. By the time she returned to her apartment each night, Emma's mind raced with everything she had learned and experienced. The city lights stretched endlessly outside her window, each flicker a reminder of the world she had chosen, or perhaps, the world that had chosen her. And deep down, despite the uncertainty, the danger, and the constant tests of courage and loyalty, she knew with undeniable clarity that she could not turn back. Vincent Moretti had irrevocably changed her life, drawing her into a realm of power, danger, and passion that she could neither resist nor abandon, and with every heartbeat, every glance, every thought, she felt the inexorable pull of the life they were now bound to, forever tied together by a promise, a ring, and a shared journey into the unknown. The city seemed to hold its breath as Emma navigated the increasingly complex and dangerous world Vincent Moretti had pulled her into, a world where every glance, every conversation, and every decision carried weight beyond imagination. She had learned to anticipate the subtle cues of power, to read the intentions behind polite smiles, and to recognize threats hidden in the most innocent-seeming interactions. Yet despite her growing confidence, there were moments when fear and doubt crept in, unbidden and relentless, reminding her that she was stepping deeper into a life she could never fully control, a life intertwined with a man whose presence dominated her thoughts and heart. Vincent, ever vigilant and calculating, seemed to sense every tremor of uncertainty, every flicker of hesitation, and he used both encouragement and subtle challenge to push her further into mastery of this dangerous, exhilarating world. One evening, he summoned her to a private rooftop overlooking the city, the skyline glittering beneath the stars, and the wind carrying a sense of foreboding and possibility that made her pulse quicken. The moment she stepped onto the terrace, she felt the familiar magnetic pull of his presence, drawing her into a space where vulnerability, desire, and caution collided. Vincent's gaze held her, dark and intense, a storm barely restrained, and for a moment, she felt as if time itself had paused. "Emma," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "you've grown stronger, faster than I anticipated. You've learned, adapted, and survived challenges that would have broken others. But the true test, the test that separates the capable from the exceptional, is yet to come." Her heart raced at his words, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension surging through her. What do you mean?" she asked, though part of her already sensed the answer. Vincent stepped closer, the space between them charged with tension, and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering in a touch that was both intimate and commanding. "The world you've entered is unforgiving. Rivals, enemies, even allies, everyone has stakes, ambitions, and secrets. And now, Emma, you are no longer just an observer. You are a player. Your decisions, your judgment, and your courage will determine not just your safety, but the balance of power, our future, and the life we've begun to build." She swallowed hard, the gravity of his words pressing into her chest, yet mingling with the thrill of rising to meet the challenge. Over the next few days, the intensity of her involvement escalated. Emma was tasked with navigating high-stakes negotiations, mediating subtle rivalries, and anticipating the moves of those who sought to challenge Vincent's empire. Each encounter tested her intellect, poise, and courage, yet with every success, she felt a growing sense of empowerment and belonging in a world that had once seemed entirely alien. Vincent remained a constant presence, sometimes guiding her discreetly, sometimes observing from a distance, and sometimes confronting her directly with challenges designed to sharpen her instincts and resolve. Their interactions were a careful dance of tension, attraction, and unspoken understanding, each glance and touch carrying meaning, each word layered with intent. One night, after a particularly tense meeting with a rival faction, Vincent led her to the penthouse balcony, the city sprawled beneath them like a sea of glittering lights and shadows. The wind tugged at her hair, and the distant hum of the city was a reminder of both opportunity and danger. "Emma," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "you have proven yourself in many ways, but the ultimate test is coming. The choices you make now will define not just your place in this world, but your place by my side." She felt a shiver run through her, both from the words and from the intensity of his presence. I understand," she whispered, though uncertainty lingered, a mixture of fear and anticipation coiling in her stomach. Vincent reached for her hand, the familiar weight of the ring grounding her in the reality of their bond. "Good," he murmured, "because what comes next will demand more than intellect or courage. It will demand trust and heart." The days that followed brought challenges unlike any she had faced before. Emma found herself navigating situations filled with danger, deception, and temptation, where a single misstep could unravel carefully laid plans. Yet with each challenge, she discovered strengths she had never known she possessed, a capacity for strategic thinking, patience, and subtle influence that allowed her to hold her own in a world dominated by power and fear. Vincent watched her growth with a mixture of pride, admiration, and the rare softness that occasionally softened his otherwise commanding presence. And through it all, the tension between them deepened, a magnetic pull that neither could ignore. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, he found her alone in his study, reviewing documents and analyzing strategies. He approached silently, his gaze holding hers, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. "Emma," he said, voice low and deliberate, "you have exceeded expectations. You have shown courage, intelligence, and loyalty beyond what I imagined. But now, the ultimate challenge awaits, and I need to know that you will stand firm, no matter what comes." She nodded, her chest tight with anticipation, fear, and undeniable attraction. "I will," she whispered, the sincerity of her voice carrying the weight of her commitment. Vincent stepped closer, his presence enveloping her in a way that was both comforting and overwhelming. "Good," he said, brushing a hand against hers, the ring catching the light. "Because after this, there will be no turning back. Your life, our lives, they will be forever intertwined, bound by the choices we make in the world we navigate together." Over the following week, the stakes escalated. Emma was drawn into high-pressure meetings, clandestine encounters, and subtle power plays that tested her intellect, courage, and emotional fortitude. Each interaction was a reminder of the dangerous world she had stepped into, yet also a testament to her growth, her adaptability, and her emerging confidence. Vincent remained her constant guide, mentor, and companion, his presence both a challenge and a source of comfort, his rare moments of vulnerability reinforcing the depth of their connection. As the days bled into nights, Emma began to realize the full extent of her transformation, from a woman untested and uncertain, to a player in a dangerous game of power, loyalty, and passion. The ring on her finger was no longer just a symbol, it was a reminder of her commitment, her courage, and the bond she shared with a man who had irrevocably changed her life. And as she stood on the balcony one night, overlooking the city and feeling the pull of both danger and desire, she understood with clarity that she would follow Vincent Moretti into whatever storm awaited, drawn by a world she had learned to navigate, a passion she could not resist, and a promise she could never break. The city was cloaked in darkness when Emma arrived at Vincent Moretti's estate, the skyline behind her flickering with the distant lights of a world she had grown to navigate with both caution and confidence. Everything had led to this night, the challenges, the lessons, the subtle tests, the moments of tension and intimacy that had drawn her deeper into Vincent's world, and deeper into his life. The ring on her finger glinted under the estate's lights, a constant reminder of the promise she had made and the bond that tied her to a man whose power, influence, and presence were unmatched. Tonight, she knew, would be the ultimate test, not of skill, strategy, or courage alone, but of trust, heart, and the choices that defined both of them. As she stepped through the grand entrance, Vincent appeared, impeccably dressed, his gaze locking onto hers with a mix of intensity, pride, and something softer that only she had ever glimpsed. "Emma," he said, his voice low, deliberate, "you've come far. You've adapted, survived, and grown stronger than I anticipated. But tonight will reveal whether we can truly face what lies ahead, together." She felt her pulse quicken, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through her. "I'm ready," she whispered, though the truth was that she didn't know if she could predict what awaited her. Vincent stepped closer, brushing a hand against hers, the ring catching the dim light, a symbol of the promise, the bond, and the shared journey that had brought them here. "Good," he murmured, "because after tonight, there is no turning back." The evening unfolded in a series of high-stakes encounters, meetings with allies and rivals, negotiations where every word and gesture carried life or death weight, and subtle tests of Emma's judgment and courage. She moved with a precision and confidence she hadn't known she possessed, her observations keen, her instincts sharp, and her presence commanding in a way that surprised even Vincent. Yet amidst the tension, the danger, and the complexity of the maneuvers, there were moments that drew her closer to him. The way his gaze lingered, the rare smiles that softened his otherwise commanding presence, the subtle touches that conveyed trust, protection, and something more intimate, something electric and undeniable. As the night wore on, they found themselves in the private study, away from the watchful eyes of associates and allies, the tension between them palpable, the air charged with unspoken words and suppressed desire. Vincent approached, his eyes dark and penetrating, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. "Emma," he said, voice low and deliberate, "you've proven yourself in every way, intellectually, strategically, and emotionally. But now, the ultimate challenge awaits, trust. Trust in me, trust in yourself, and trust in the bond we've forged." She swallowed hard, aware that this was more than a test, it was a culmination of everything they had shared, learned, and endured together. "I trust you," she whispered, though the words carried weight far beyond mere utterance. They were a declaration of commitment, courage, and choice. Vincent stepped closer, closing the distance, his presence enveloping her in warmth, intensity, and an undeniable magnetism that made her pulse race. "Good," he murmured, brushing a thumb against the ring. "Because the choices you make now will define us both." Over the next hours, Emma faced a series of final challenges, subtle negotiations, encounters with those who sought to undermine Vincent's empire, and scenarios that tested every skill, instinct, and lesson she had learned. She moved with precision, intelligence, and courage, earning not just respect from Vincent, but a deeper sense of confidence in herself and her place in this dangerous, intoxicating world. And through it all, Vincent was ever present, a guiding force, a protector, a challenger, and a companion, his rare moments of vulnerability and intimacy reinforcing the bond between them. Finally, as the city slept beneath the glow of distant lights, Vincent led her to the estate balcony, the night alive with possibility, danger, and the hum of a world they had mastered together. He took her hand, the ring glinting between them, and for a moment, the tension, the challenges, and the lessons of the past weeks seemed to crystallize into a single, undeniable truth. "Emma," he said, voice low, deliberate, "tonight has proven what I always suspected, that you are not just capable but extraordinary. Loyal, courageous, intelligent, and fearless. And because of that, because of everything you've done, everything you've endured, and everything you've become, I ask you now, will you stand by my side, not just in this world, but in every challenge, every danger, and every triumph that lies ahead?" Emma's breath caught. Her mind raced, recalling the journey that had brought her here, from the shock of waking with a ring on her finger to the whirlwind of lessons, danger, attraction, and trust. Her heart pounded, and yet clarity settled within her. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and the unknown, and she had emerged stronger, braver, and more certain of her own strength and desires. "Yes," she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of her commitment, courage, and love, binding her to Vincent in a promise that neither distance nor danger could undo. Vincent's expression softened, a rare, genuine smile breaking through his usual intensity, and he pulled her close, holding her hand, brushing her hair from her face, and letting the moment stretch between them, a culmination of trust, passion, and shared destiny. "Then it begins," he murmured, voice low and intimate. "Together." And as they stood there, overlooking the city they had learned to navigate, a world of power, danger, and intrigue stretching before them, Emma felt the full weight and exhilaration of her choice. The ring on her finger was more than a symbol, it was a declaration, a bond, and a promise fulfilled. She had stepped into Vincent Moretti's world, survived its trials, proven her courage, and found a place not just beside him, but within the pulse of the empire he commanded. And for the first time since waking with that ring, Emma allowed herself to fully embrace the life she had chosen, the man she had trusted, and the journey that lay ahead, knowing that whatever storms, challenges, or passions awaited, she would face them not as an observer, but as a partner, equal in courage, heart, and resolve. The night air carried a sense of finality and new beginnings, a mixture of triumph, desire, and promise. Emma looked at Vincent, and in that gaze, she saw not just power and danger, but trust, respect, and an unspoken love that had grown through fire, challenge, and shared moments of intimacy and understanding. The city below shimmered like a sea of possibilities, and Emma knew, with undeniable certainty, that their story had only just begun, and that together, they could face anything, conquer everything, and write the next chapters of their lives with courage, passion, and unbreakable trust, bound forever by a single, glimmering ring and the promise it represented.